Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Stuart Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us. I am delighted to be joined by Jorge Martin. He's the Secretariat of HENSAF Venezuela. Thank you so much for being with us, Jorge.
It's a pleasure, as always.
One thing I think that is constant is the plight of workers worldwide and our ideals of what, worker solidarity could be like. So perhaps we can begin our conversation with what does May 1st still signify for Latin America and in particular the region of South America?
Yes, well, contrary to what some people try to say today, May 1st was created as a day of struggle. It's a day of struggle for workers' rights across the world, which was originally created in order to commemorate the Chicago martyrs, the 5 Chicago anarchists who were tried and convicted on charges of terrorism, and they were condemned for that and were hanged. So this is what we are commemorating, and this is not a day of celebration so much, but rather a day of struggle. The workers across the world are still oppressed by the capitalists in Latin America and beyond, and so this continues to be an important day of struggle. And particularly in these conditions that we live in now, the conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit the workers particularly badly. In many countries, workers cannot afford to self-isolate at home, even if they have symptoms. They have to continue working. In other countries, the sources of work have dried up, particularly, many Latin American countries. 40 or 50 or even 60% of the workforce works in the informal sector. Many of them just selling wares on the streets, and these sources of income have now dried up because of the pandemic. So it's a really difficult situation this year. But nevertheless, there were important May Day marches and struggles across the continent, including in Colombia, where there was a national strike that started on the 28th of April and is continuing to this day. In Chile, where there was also a general strike on the last day of April, on the 30th of April, and then big demonstrations on the 1st of May, and in many other countries. In others, like for instance in Argentina or in Brazil, where the pandemic is at its peak, there were no public demonstrations. It wasn't safe for people to meet together in the streets. But there were also online events, virtual demonstrations or public meetings online in order to mark this day of workers' struggle.
Few people think of countries like Peru, or Ecuador or, Colombia, for instance. What are some of the stories that we need to remember, about our region and about the people not just in struggle, but about the ways that we resiliently fight back imperialism and claim back our right to self-determination?
Yes, I would say the situation now is quite interesting because just before the pandemic started, in the second half of 2019, there were big movements across Latin America. There was the ongoing mass movement in Haiti against the illegitimate government of Moïse Jovenel. There was also an uprising in Ecuador in October 2019 against the government of Lenin Moreno, a government that had been introducing an IMF-inspired austerity package against the workers and peasants. And that uprising went very far. The government had to flee the capital, and they were very close to overthrowing the government. Then there was the movement in Chile that we've all heard of, which went on for about 3 months, October, November, December 2019, which was sparked by an increase in the price of public transportation fares in Santiago, the capital, but it became a national uprising against the whole system again. The main demand was that Piñera, the president, should go. And then we also had the national strike in Colombia at the end of November 2019, which was supposed to be a one-day protest, but then it became like a whole week of mass protests on the streets against the government of Duque. So this is the situation that we had just before the pandemic. Now, when the pandemic struck at the beginning of 2020, this whole movement, this wave of uprisings and insurrections was stopped temporarily. People were obviously shocked by the pandemic. In many countries, there were measures of quarantine. People had to stay home. There were curfews and so on. And so for a period of time, this whole process was paused, if you want. But now I think that what we are seeing is, despite the fact that the pandemic is still hitting the whole of Latin America in a very harsh way, in countries like Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, above all, but also Paraguay, Argentina, what we have seen is that despite the pandemic, people are now forced to come out on the streets. There's been these big mobilizations in Chile, this movement that's ongoing now in Colombia, national strike that's lasted for over a week, and movements like that. There was a big uprising in Paraguay in March, which was directly linked to the question of the pandemic, when the government was completely unable to provide for oxygen, ICU beds, and so on. So what we are seeing is the retying of the knot of the Red October, if you want, Red October 2019. People have no other alternative but to come out and fight, because the situation is terrible, with the combination of the COVID-19 pandemic and the capitalist crisis. And in many countries, for instance, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Colombia, there have been big scandals where politicians and wealthy people, businessmen, have had access to the vaccine, jumping the queue, when the majority of the population has no access at all. And this question of access to the vaccine, access to healthcare, is now becoming one terrain of struggle across the whole continent. And we see how, yes, the wealthy capitalist countries, the imperialist countries around the world are going very fast, or relatively fast, with the vaccination efforts in the US, in Britain, not so much in Europe. But most of these countries, Latin America, where the pandemic has had a massive impact, they're way behind. And one of the reasons is because the advanced capitalist countries are monopolizing access to vaccines. And again, we see here the question of capitalism. Capitalism means that those who have money can have access to the means to protect their lives. And those who don't have money, particularly these countries, and these countries are not poor, they're very wealthy countries, wealthy in natural resources, in minerals and so on, but they are poor because they've been impoverished by imperialist domination, so they don't have the necessary money, access to funding to buy or purchase these vaccines, and therefore people are dying because of that. So you can see directly the link between the existence of the capitalist system, private profit motive, of the big multinational companies and the imperialist countries, and the fact that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, are dying in places like Latin America.
We're going to have continuous crisis if we continue to make people so vulnerable by poor housing, poor employment, hunger, wages, all of those things compromise not just our health, but our immunity to crisis. On that vein, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what we see then, despite all these attacks, despite all this, we are going to an election in Peru, and I wonder if you could comment on how you see this unfolding and the significance of, this election for us in Latin America.
No, it's not well known that in November there was a big movement in Peru. There was an attempt by the government, by the Congress, to remove the president on allegations of corruption. And this led to a mass movement on the streets, not because people were in favor of President Vizcarra, who was being removed, but because they knew that, in fact, those who were removing Vizcarra from power were as corrupt or even more corrupt than him, and the whole thing was a farce. So there was a big movement that lasted for about a week, and the government was scrambling, the Congress was scrambling to find a new president. They had 3 or 4 during the week. Finally, they managed to calm the situation, but that movement reflected deep-seated anger, very deep-seated opposition to all bourgeois politicians. You have to think that of the last 5 presidents of Peru, they've all been indicted on corruption charges. One of them committed suicide in order not to face trial. Another one is in the United States waiting for an extradition request. Another one is in jail. So, I mean, the whole situation is an example of the rottenness of bourgeois politics after 20 or 30 years of this so-called neoliberalism that has made a lot of people in Peru very rich. A small minority at the top have become very rich, but the masses in general have become impoverished, and the country has been completely open through privatizations to foreign multinationals and imperialist companies in the fields of energy, mining, water, and so on. And so that November movement was an early indication that something very deep was starting to change in Peru. And now this was then reflected in the election. The election was a presidential and National Congress election. The first round of the presidential election was very fractured. The whole political scenario was very fractured. There were 5 or 6 different candidates getting more or less the same results in the opinion polls. But finally, 2 of them went to the second round. But the one that came first with 19% of the vote is a man called Pedro Castillo, who will now face in the second round of the election Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of Fujimori, the one who was the dictator of Peru in the 1990s and that led the dirty war against the guerrilla movement at that time. So this is a very polarized election. And who is this Pedro Castillo? Pedro Castillo is a teacher, is a trade unionist in the teachers' union, and he was the leader of a very radical teachers' strike that took place in 2017. And this strike was led by a committee of struggle, delegates elected by the different regions, and Pedro Castillo was the spokesperson. The strike was also against the trade union leadership, which didn't want this strike to go ahead, and against the education ministry. The strike ended up in a partial victory, and Pedro Castillo became very popular as a result of this. He is the candidate of a party called Peru Libre. It is a peculiar formation that describes itself as a Marxist, Mariáteguist organization, after the name of José Carlos Mariátegui, the founder of the trade unions in Peru and founder of the Communist Party. And it has a program that I will say is not a full socialist program, but it contains many very advanced elements. For instance, he says that the contracts with the multinationals will all be reviewed. At present, the multinationals take 80% of the profits, while they pay 20% to the state. And he says it should be the other way around. The state should take 80%. And he also said, if the multinationals do not want to accept this renegotiation, then we'll expropriate them, we'll nationalize them, because these minerals are Peruvian. And the main slogan of his campaign was "No more poor people in a rich country," which I think is very telling. It's a very advanced slogan. He also said that he will only take his wage as a teacher. He will not take a presidential wage. He will take his wage as a teacher. He will reduce the wage of the Congress representatives. And he will also dismiss the Constitutional Tribunal, which is riddled with corruption. And all other public powers will be now elected directly by the people. So, I mean, it's a very advanced, nationalist, very progressive program. And he says he's going to do this so that the budget for education can increase, the budget for healthcare can increase, so to benefit the people in general. And his party is more or less modeled on the experience of Ecuador and Correa and Bolivia and Evo Morales. Now, there are other parts of his program which are not progressive, and I think it needs to be mentioned. For instance, he is against same-sex marriage. He has a very unclear position on the question of abortion rights, and this is not good. It's not good at all. It's not progressive. But it needs to be understood in the context of Peru being under the very strong influence of fundamentalist churches and the penetration of evangelist church organizations and so on. Nevertheless, these prejudices, reactionary prejudices, should be combated, but they should not distract us from the main reason people are voting for him. Is not because of this. Is because they want fundamental change, and they connect with this idea of no poor people in a rich country. Now, in the opinion polls, he has 40%, while Keiko Fujimori is down at 20%. Pedro Castillo has the advantage in all of the provinces of the country. In the rural areas, he has 60% of the vote. In the south of the country, he has 45, 50, 55% of the vote, with the exception of Lima. In Lima, where the bulk of the middle and upper class is concentrated, he is second to Keiko Fujimori. And it's quite clear this has become a class battle. The workers, the poor, the peasants, the indigenous are voting for Pedro Castillo, while the oligarchy and the rich and the wealthy putting their weight behind Keiko Fujimori, even though some of them might not particularly like her. So this is very interesting. The oligarchy, the business owners, have put up billboards in Lima saying socialism is poverty, communism is disaster, is violence, socialism leads to communism. So they're basically saying that this guy is a communist, this guy is linked to the Shining Path terrorist guerrillas and this and that. And this is having no impact on the electorate. The people are completely disregarding these allegations, these founded allegations, and they are voting for him because they want fundamental change. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in the election. If all goes as the opinion polls say at this point, he will win by a substantial majority. Pedro Castillo will win, and he will be the next president of Peru. And then if he tries to implement his program of renegotiating the contracts with the mining multinationals, he will find fierce opposition. We have seen this before. You mentioned Chavez at the beginning of the conversation. And Chavez was overthrown by a coup in 2002 when he attempted to carry out a mild agrarian reform. The same thing will happen to Pedro Castillo. They will try to overthrow him. The U.S. Embassy will be very active trying to prevent him from being elected. And if they can't overthrow him, they will try to moderate his program. They will try to curtail his freedom of action. I don't know. I mean, there's any number of things that they can try, but this is very interesting process in a country like Peru. After many years where the left was demonized, now we see the emergence of someone who leads a party that calls itself Marxist, getting 40% in the opinion polls. I think this is very significant. It goes beyond his actual program. It just tells you that people want fundamental change, not only in Peru, but in Colombia, in everywhere, in Brazil, in Chile, and so on.
I wonder if you could touch for a moment on, the recent demonstrations in Colombia as well, because as you point out, not only are we hungry for change, but we want change that comes with dignity, that comes with less hunger for people.
Yes, I mean, the situation in Colombia is also very, very interesting. I mean, you have followed Latin America yourself. I have followed Latin America for many years. And on the face of it, Colombia is perhaps the last country where you would expect a mass movement, because this is a country that is very heavily under the domination of the oligarchy. And although formally there is a bourgeois democracy, people can vote every 5 years or so, and there are freedom of speech, and there's freedom of trade union organization. In practice, this doesn't really exist. This is an oligarchy that uses paramilitary gangs. We're talking about people who go into thugs, who go into villages with chainsaws and start killing people just because they belong to a peasant union, perhaps. Hundreds of trade union and social movement leaders have been killed since the peace agreement between the government and the guerrilla. This is the day-to-day situation that trade unionists and social movement activists face in Colombia. And in this country, with these levels of violence and repression, we see a huge, extraordinary mass movement, which started on the 28th of April as a one-day national stoppage or national strike against the tax reform, which is aimed at making the poor and the middle class pay more taxes while maintaining the exemptions for big businesses and wealthy capitalist owners. And so the people started by rejecting that. Now, this movement was then met with brutal repression. In 1 week of demonstrations, 37 people have been killed, the big majority of them being killed by the actions of the police and the army. 2 days into the strike, the government sent the army into a number of big cities. For instance, in Cali, where the movement was much larger from the very beginning, the army was sent in. And we've seen scenes of police and the army using firearms against unarmed demonstrators. Completely incredible scenes. And as I said, 37 people have been confirmed dead by this human rights NGO called Temblores, but about 900 people have been injured. Dozens of other people have disappeared. No one knows their whereabouts. People have been assaulted and even sexually assaulted at demonstrations by the police. And nevertheless, the movement is continuing. Is now reached 1 week, and it doesn't seem to be weakening. The government of Duque has been forced to withdraw the tax reform, go back to Congress with a new proposal. The Minister of Finance has resigned, and this hasn't stopped the movement. People are still on the streets, and now they don't just want the end of the tax reform. They want this government to go. They want the healthcare reform to go. They want the hated riot police, the SMAT, to be disbanded. So this is quite a serious movement, as I say, in a country where the ruling class is particularly brutal, vicious, and repressive, and has the full backing of the United States. This is a country where there are 7 U.S. military bases. You might remember about Plan Colombia, which was a program of massive funding by the United States of the Colombian military forces. This is one of the strongholds of U.S. imperialism in the region, which has been used for provocations against Venezuela, provocations against Ecuador in the past, and so on. And nevertheless, here, the workers, peasants, the indigenous population, the youth who are at the forefront of this movement are fighting back. And at the moment, it seems they are winning. They haven't won everything they want, and they have paid a very high price, but they are on the offensive. And I think that this is very important and very, very significant. There have been even instances reported of some rank-and-file soldiers who sympathize with the demonstrators, who feel uneasy about being used to kill their brothers and sisters, because at the end of the day, the ranks of the Colombian army are made up of the sons of workers and peasants who live the same conditions. So it's a very dangerous movement, a very dangerous time for the Colombian oligarchy, for the government of Duque, and also for Uribe, who is fully behind Duque, who is the one who's moving the threads from behind. So I think it's very, very encouraging, very interesting, and very hopeful, because if the masses can rise up in a country like Colombia, they can and start to win, they can do so anywhere else, really. And this will be an inspiration for other Latin American countries, without a doubt.
Thank you so much for not only keeping your pulse, the many challenges we face as workers, but also on bringing us inspiring stories as well.
And
as you point out,
incidentally, Biden hasn't changed his policy in relation to Cuba or in relation to Venezuela. All of the sanctions are still in place, and there's no indication that they're going to change for now.
It was never an illusion, I think, for many Latin Americans that, the changing governments in the U.S. would let up on the pressure that they put on, Latin America, whether it be Honduras, Colombia, or Venezuela. It's however, I think that it's really important, as Galeano once said, apathy is not a luxury we can afford ourselves. So what keeps you energized and connected to continue to struggle, to continue to move and create even within pandemic restrictions and conditions?
Yes, I will say that, look, the alternative we have in front of us is socialism or barbarism. This is the phrase that Rosa Luxemburg used over 100 years ago, and I think it's relevant today. We see it with the pandemic, with the destruction of the environment, a threat to the existence of human life on this planet, and everything that goes around us. This is the alternative, socialism or barbarism. Either we put an end to this capitalist system based on exploitation, oppression, depredation of the environment, and so on, or the future is very bleak. And so there's no other alternative. But at the same time, these conditions are creating massive resistance. I feel completely inspired by the uprising of the Ecuadorian workers and peasants in 2019, the massive estallido, the mass movement of the Chilean workers and youth in 2019. They basically proved that in many cases, without a very clear leadership at the head, that they do not want to live anymore in the old ways. And they prepared to come out on the streets and risk their lives, basically, in order to improve their conditions. And now the movement in Colombia is also enormously inspiring. I mean, as I said, 37 people have died, and still people are coming out because they've had enough. They want something better. And this something better is not beyond reach. It is possible. As Pedro Castillo says in Peru, Peru is a rich country, but there are a lot of poor people, because this wealth is not in the hands of the majority. So this is what's inspiring, not only the absolute need to transform the situation, but the fact that the masses have proven on many occasions that this is possible, that they have the resilience, that they have the determination to change, and they have the power. When the masses come out on the streets, everything stops. In the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement was also extremely inspiring. This movement was on a bigger scale than the civil rights movement in the 1960s in terms of the number of people involved. This is really inspiring. This is a new world that we're trying to build, rising from the ashes of the old crumbling capitalist system. And this is absolutely necessary.
Thank you again for being with us today. Thank you.
It was my pleasure, as always. Thank you.
We've come to the end of our show, Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an internationally syndicated weekly program made available through campus and community stations and available out to the world at www.latinwavesmedia.com.